9 Japanese bombers are racing toward the USS Lexington. They are minutes away from their bomb run. If they reach the carrier, they will sink it. The entire task force is vulnerable, but there is a problem. Only 2 American fighters are close enough to intercept. Lieutenant Edward "Butch" O'Hare and his wingman climb toward the enemy formation. Then his wingman's guns jam. O'Hare is alone. 9 twin-engine bombers, each one armed with multiple machine guns and a 20-millimeter tail cannon. O'Hare has 60 rounds of ammunition left. He does not turn back. He firewalls the throttle on his F-4F Wildcat and flies straight into the formation. In the next 4 minutes, O'Hare will shoot down 5 bombers, damage a 6th, and save the Lexington. He will become the United States Navy's first fighter ace of World War II, and he will do it with only 60 rounds. To understand Butch O'Hare, you have to start with his father. Edward Joseph O'Hare, known as Easy Eddie, was a high-powered attorney in Chicago during Prohibition. He was also Al Capone's personal lawyer. Easy Eddie helped manage Capone's illegal empire. He ran Capone's dog racing tracks. He handled the legal side of slot machine operations and bootlegging rackets. Easy Eddie made a fortune working for the most feared gangster in America. He lived in luxury. He bought expensive cars. He sent his son to the best schools. But Easy Eddie had a problem. His son, Edward Henry O'Hare, called Butch, was growing up watching his father work for criminals. Butch was born on March 13, 1914, in St. Louis, Missouri. He was the only son in the family. He had 2 sisters, Patricia and Marilyn. In 1927, Butch's parents divorced. His mother, Selma, stayed in St. Louis with the girls. Butch stayed with his father in Chicago. Easy Eddie enrolled Butch in Western Military Academy, a prestigious boarding school in Alton, Illinois. Butch excelled. He played sports. He was president of the Rifle Club. He was disciplined, smart, and competitive. Easy Eddie was proud. But he also knew his association with Al Capone was a stain on the family name. By the early 1930s, the federal government was closing in on Capone. Easy Eddie made a decision that would cost him his life. He turned on Capone. Easy Eddie provided the Internal Revenue Service with financial records that proved Capone was evading taxes. The evidence was damning. In October 1931, Al Capone was convicted of tax evasion and sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. Easy Eddie's betrayal was one of the key reasons Capone went to jail. Some believe Easy Eddie did it to clear his name so Butch could get into the United States Naval Academy. Others believe he wanted to set a good example for his son. Either way, Easy Eddie knew the Capone organization would never forgive him. In 1933, Butch O'Hare entered the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. He had failed the entrance exam the first time and attended a prep school to improve his grades. On his second attempt, he passed. Butch was not the best student at Annapolis. He was average academically, but he excelled in athletics. He was a champion swimmer. He played water polo for the Naval Academy team. He was known for his competitiveness and his physical toughness. Butch graduated in June 1937 with the rank of ensign. His father attended the ceremony. It was one of the last times Butch saw him alive. On November 8, 1939, Easy Eddie O'Hare was driving alone in Chicago. 2 cars pulled up beside him at an intersection. Gunmen opened fire with shotguns and machine guns. Easy Eddie was killed instantly. No one was ever arrested for the murder. Everyone knew who ordered it. Al Capone was in prison, but his organization was still operating. Easy Eddie had betrayed the mob. The mob never forgets. Butch was devastated. He had lost his father, but he also inherited his father's determination to prove himself. Butch threw himself into his naval career. After graduating from Annapolis, Butch began flight training at Naval Air Station Pensacola in Florida. He trained on biplanes, including the Naval Aircraft Factory N-3N Yellow Peril and the Stearman N. Sminnis 1. He advanced to the SNJ trainer and eventually to the nimble Boeing F-4 Billion, where he learned aerobatics and aerial gunnery. Butch finished his naval aviation training on May 2, 1940. He was an exceptional pilot. His gunnery scores were among the best in his class. On July 1, 1940, Lieutenant Junior Grade O'Hare was assigned to Fighter Squadron 3, VF-3, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga. His commanding officer was Lieutenant John Thatch, one of the most innovative fighter tacticians in the Navy. In 1933, Butch O'Hare entered the United States Naval Academy at Annapolis. He had failed the entrance exam the first time and attended a prep school to improve his grades. On his second attempt, he passed. Butch was not the best student at Annapolis. He was average academically, but he excelled in athletics. He was a champion swimmer. He played water polo for the Naval Academy team. He was known for his competitiveness and his physical toughness. Butch graduated in June 1937 with the rank of ensign. His father attended the ceremony. It was one of the last times Butch saw him alive. On November 8, 1939, Easy Eddie O'Hare was driving alone in Chicago. Two cars pulled up beside him at an intersection. Gunmen opened fire with shotguns and machine guns. Easy Eddie was killed instantly. No one was ever arrested for the murder. Everyone knew who ordered it. Al Capone was in prison, but his organization was still operating. Easy Eddie had betrayed the mob. The mob never forgets. Butch was devastated. He had lost his father, but he also inherited his father's determination to prove himself. Butch threw himself into his naval career. After graduating from Annapolis, Butch began flight training at Naval Air Station Pensacola in Florida. He trained on biplanes, including the Naval Aircraft Factory N3N Yellow Peril and the Stearman N. Sminnis 1. He advanced to the SNJ trainer and eventually to the nimble Boeing F-4 Billion, where he learned aerobatics and aerial gunnery. Butch finished his naval aviation training on May 2, 1940. He was an exceptional pilot. His gunnery scores were among the best in his class. On July 1, 1940, Lieutenant Junior Grade O'Hare was assigned to Fighter Squadron 3, VF-3, aboard the aircraft carrier USS Saratoga. His commanding officer was Lieutenant John Thatch, one of the most innovative fighter tacticians in the Navy. John Thatch recognized O'Hare's talent immediately. Thatch was developing new aerial combat tactics to counter the highly maneuverable Japanese Zero fighter. He knew American pilots would need superior gunnery and teamwork to survive. Thatch emphasized marksmanship in his training. He drilled his pilots relentlessly. O'Hare absorbed everything. By 1941, more than half of all VF-3 pilots, including O'Hare, earned the E for gunnery excellence. O'Hare was one of the best shots in the squadron. Thatch later developed the Thatch Weave, a defensive maneuver that allowed two American fighters to protect each other against more agile opponents. The tactic is still taught today. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. O'Hare and VF-3 were at sea aboard the Saratoga. The squadron was not involved in the attack, but the United States was now at war. O'Hare wanted to fight. For the next 2 months, the Saratoga patrolled the Pacific, searching for Japanese targets. On January 11, 1942, disaster struck. The Saratoga was hit by a Japanese submarine torpedo southwest of Hawaii. The carrier was badly damaged. She limped back to the west coast for repairs that would take 5 months. VF-3 needed a new home. On January 31, 1942, the squadron transferred to the USS Lexington. The Lexington was one of the largest and most powerful aircraft carriers in the Pacific. Her air group was aggressive. Her captain, Frederick Sherman, was willing to take risks. In mid-February 1942, the Lexington Task Force was ordered to penetrate Japanese-controlled waters north of New Ireland in the Bismarck Archipelago. The mission was to disrupt Japanese operations and gather intelligence. The task force would be deep in enemy territory, far from friendly support. It was a dangerous assignment. O'Hare and VF-3 were ready. On February 20th, 1942, the Lexington was 450 miles from the Japanese naval base at Rabaul. It was mid-afternoon. The carrier's radar picked up an unknown aircraft 35 miles out. Two fighters from the Combat Air Patrol were sent to investigate. They shot down a Kawanishi H-6000 Mavis reconnaissance flying boat. Another contact appeared. More fighters were scrambled. They shot down a second Mavis. The Japanese now knew the Lexington was in the area. Captain Sherman knew what was coming. Japanese bombers would be launched from Rabaul within the hour. At 3:42 in the afternoon, the Lexington's radar operator picked up a large formation of aircraft approaching from the southwest. 9 twin-engine Mitsubishi G4 Million Betty bombers from the Japanese 4th Kokutai were inbound. They were 12 miles out and closing fast. The Combat Air Patrol was scattered. Most of VF-3's fighters were chasing earlier contacts or low on fuel. Only two fighters were in position to intercept. Lieutenant Butch O'Hare and his wingman, Ensign Marion Duff Dufilho. Captain Sherman ordered them to intercept immediately. O'Hare and Dufilho climbed toward the incoming bombers. The Betty bombers were flying in a tight V formation. Each bomber carried a crew of 7, a bomb load of 1,700 pounds, and defensive armament that included 4 machine guns and a 20mm tail cannon. The Bettys were fast and heavily armed. They were also vulnerable. Their fuel tanks were not self-sealing. A few well-placed shots could turn a Betty into a fireball. O'Hare knew this. He also knew he had to stop them before they reached the Lexington. If 9 bombers dropped their payloads on the carrier, the Lexington would be crippled or sunk. O'Hare and Dufilho positioned themselves for an attack. Then Dufilho's guns jammed. All 650 caliber machine guns on his F4F Wildcat failed. Dufilho tried to clear the jam. Nothing worked. He pulled out of the fight. O'Hare was alone. 9 bombers, 1 fighter. O'Hare did not hesitate. He firewalled the throttle and dove straight at the formation. O'Hare's first pass was perfect. He came in from the side of the V formation, aiming for the rear bombers. His 650 caliber machine guns roared. Tracers streaked toward the lead bomber on the right side of the formation. The Betty's fuel tank exploded. The bomber rolled over and plummeted into the ocean. O'Hare shifted his aim to the next bomber in line. Another burst. Another explosion. The second bomber broke apart in midair. 2 bombers down in seconds. The sailors on the Lexington watched in disbelief. They could see the entire fight from the deck of the carrier. O'Hare pulled into a tight turn and came around for another pass. The remaining Japanese bombers continued toward the Lexington. They were minutes from their bomb run. O'Hare dove again. This time he came in from the front head-on. The closing speed was over 500 miles per hour. The Japanese gunners opened fire. Tracers and 20mm cannon rounds filled the air. O'Hare ignored them. He fired short controlled bursts. A third bomber caught fire and fell. O'Hare broke left and came around again. He was running low on ammunition. He had started the fight with only 60 rounds remaining from earlier patrols. Every shot had to count. O'Hare lined up on the lead bomber. This was the aircraft carrying the master bombardier, the man responsible for coordinating the attack. If O'Hare could kill the lead bomber, the formation would lose coordination. He fired. The lead bomber erupted in flames and spiraled into the sea. 4 bombers down. O'Hare swung toward a 5th bomber. He fired his remaining rounds. The bomber began trailing smoke and losing altitude. O'Hare was out of ammunition. He had expended all 60 rounds. In less than 4 minutes, O'Hare had shot down 5 Japanese bombers and severely damaged a 6th. The remaining bombers scattered. They jettisoned their bombs into the ocean and fled. The Lexington was safe. Let us know in the comments where you are watching this from. Are you in the United States, Germany, the United Kingdom, or somewhere else? We would love to know who is keeping these stories alive. O'Hare returned to the Lexington and landed. As he taxied across the flight deck, a nervous machine gunner on the carrier's catwalk opened fire on his plane. The young sailor mistook O'Hare's Wildcat for an enemy aircraft. The gunner's aim was poor. O'Hare was unharmed, but it was a close call. O'Hare had survived 9 Japanese bombers only to be shot at by his own side. Word of O'Hare's action spread quickly. Captain Sherman immediately recommended O'Hare for the Medal of Honor. O'Hare refused the recommendation. He insisted that any pilot in his squadron would have done the same thing. Sherman overruled him. The Navy needed a hero. The country needed a hero. It was March 1942. The United States had been at war for 3 months. Pearl Harbor was still a fresh wound. The Philippines were falling. Wake Island had fallen. Guam was lost. American forces were retreating across the Pacific. The news was bleak. Then the Navy announced O'Hare's victory. The story electrified the nation. On April 21, 1942, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt presented the Medal of Honor to Lieutenant Commander Edward O'Hare at the White House. The ceremony began at 10:45 in the morning. O'Hare stood in front of the president in his dress uniform. Roosevelt read the citation aloud. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in aerial combat, at grave risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, as section leader and pilot of Fighting Squadron 3 on February 20, 1942. Having lost the assistance of his teammates, Lieutenant O'Hare interposed his plane between his ship and an advancing enemy formation of 9 attacking twin-engine heavy bombers. Without hesitation, alone and unaided, he repeatedly attacked this enemy formation, at close range in the face of intense combined machine gun and cannon fire. The citation continued. Despite this concentrated opposition, Lieutenant O'Hare, by his gallant and courageous action, his extremely skillful marksmanship in making the most of every shot of his limited amount of ammunition, shot down 5 enemy bombers and severely damaged a 6th before they reached the bomb release point. As a result of his gallant action, one of the most daring, if not the most daring, single action in the history of combat aviation, he undoubtedly saved his carrier from serious damage. O'Hare was promoted to lieutenant commander. He was 28 years old. He was America's first fighter ace of World War II. He was a national hero. If you are enjoying this story and want more untold accounts from World War II, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We are bringing you stories that most history books never covered. After receiving the Medal of Honor, O'Hare was reassigned to training duties. Navy policy was to use its best combat pilots to train newer pilots. O'Hare was sent to Maui, Hawaii. He did not want to go. He wanted to stay in combat, but the Navy needed him to pass on his knowledge. O'Hare spent months training fighter pilots in gunnery and tactics. He emphasized accuracy. He taught them to make every shot count. He told them about the 4 minutes over the Lexington. He told them to stay calm. He told them to aim carefully. He saved lives by training those pilots. On June 19, 1942, O'Hare assumed command of VF-3, relieving his former commander, John Thatch. O'Hare was now a squadron commander. He continued training pilots throughout 1942 and into 1943, but O'Hare was restless. He wanted to get back into combat. He wanted to contribute more than just training. By mid-1943, the Navy was developing new tactics for night fighting. Japanese bombers had been conducting nighttime attacks on American carriers. The attacks were difficult to counter. Radar-guided fighters could intercept bombers during the day, but night interceptions were nearly impossible. O'Hare volunteered to help develop night fighter tactics. In late 1943, O'Hare joined Air Group 6 aboard the USS Enterprise. He was now a lieutenant commander and the commanding officer of the Air Group. The Enterprise was part of the task force supporting the invasion of Tarawa in the Gilbert Islands. The invasion began on November 20, 1943. The fighting was brutal. Thousands of Marines died taking the tiny island. The Japanese launched nighttime air attacks against the American fleet. O'Hare believed his experimental night fighter tactics could stop them. On the night of November 26, 1943, O'Hare launched his first night fighter mission. O'Hare's plan was simple but dangerous. He would fly a Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter alongside a TBF Avenger torpedo bomber equipped with radar. The Avenger's radar operator would guide O'Hare toward enemy bombers in the dark. O'Hare would close in and shoot them down. It had never been done before. The risks were enormous. Flying at night over the ocean was disorienting. Identifying targets in the dark was nearly impossible. Friendly fire was a constant danger. O'Hare knew the risks. He launched anyway. At approximately 7:15 in the evening on November 26th, O'Hare took off from the Enterprise. He was flying with Lieutenant Commander John Phillips in the TBF Avenger and Ensign Warren Scahn in another Hellcat. The trio climbed into the night sky. The Avenger's radar picked up contacts. Japanese bombers were approaching the task force. O'Hare and Scahn moved into position. The darkness was total. No moon, no stars, just blackness. The radar operator in the Avenger guided them closer. Then they saw the bombers, silhouettes against the slightly lighter sky. O'Hare attacked. He closed to within 200 feet of a Japanese bomber and opened fire. The bomber exploded. O'Hare pulled away and looked for another target. Scahn was flying on his left. The TBF Avenger was behind them. Suddenly, the Avenger's turret gunner opened fire. Tracers streaked through the darkness. Scahn later reported that he thought the tracers passed between the two Hellcats. A few seconds after the gunfire, O'Hare's plane slid out of formation. Scahn tried to follow him down, but O'Hare was moving too fast. He disappeared into the darkness. Scahn called for O'Hare on the radio. No response. O'Hare was gone. The official Navy report states that O'Hare was lost in action on November 26, 1943, in the vicinity of Tarawa. His body was never recovered. His plane was never found. For decades, the Navy assumed O'Hare was shot down by a Japanese bomber, but questions remained. Some historians believe O'Hare was killed by friendly fire from the Avenger's turret gunner. The timing of the gunfire and O'Hare's disappearance is suspicious. The turret gunner may have mistaken O'Hare's Hellcat for a Japanese aircraft in the darkness. Others believe a Japanese bomber shot O'Hare down during the engagement. The truth will never be known. O'Hare was declared dead on November 27, 1943. He was 29 years old. O'Hare's loss was a blow to the Navy and to the nation. He was one of the most famous pilots in America. He was a symbol of courage and skill. His death was front-page news. The Navy named a destroyer, the USS O'Hare, in his honor. The ship was commissioned in 1945 and sponsored by O'Hare's mother, Selma. In 1949, the city of Chicago renamed Orchard Depot Airport to O'Hare International Airport in his honor. Today, O'Hare Airport is one of the busiest airports in the world. Millions of travelers pass through it every year. Most have no idea who Butch O'Hare was or what he did. The numbers from February 20, 1942, tell the story of an impossible fight. 9 Japanese bombers attacking the USS Lexington. 1 American fighter pilot in position to intercept. 60 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition remaining. 4 minutes of combat. 5 bombers shot down. 1 bomber severely damaged. 3 bombers forced to retreat without dropping their bombs. 0 damage to the Lexington. 1 pilot saved an entire aircraft carrier and everyone aboard. O'Hare fired 60 rounds and killed or damaged 6 bombers. His accuracy was 90%. According to his commanding officer, John Thatch, O'Hare wasted almost no ammunition. Every burst hit its target. O'Hare's Medal of Honor was the first awarded to a naval aviator in World War II. He was the Navy's first fighter ace of the war. He became a national hero at a time when America desperately needed one. His story was published in newspapers across the country. His face was on the cover of Life magazine. He went on a war bond tour and raised millions of dollars for the war effort. He inspired a generation of young men to join the Navy and become pilots. O'Hare's legacy extended far beyond that one fight over the Lexington. O'Hare flew combat missions for nearly 2 years. He trained hundreds of pilots. He helped develop night fighter tactics that saved lives. He commanded VF-3 and later Air Group 6. He logged hundreds of flight hours in combat zones. He survived dozens of missions. But he did not survive the night of November 26, 1943. O'Hare was lost attempting something no one had done before. He was trying to protect the fleet from night attacks. He was leading from the front. He was doing what he always did, fighting. Butch O'Hare spent his entire life trying to escape his father's shadow. Easy Eddie O'Hare worked for Al Capone. He made a fortune from illegal rackets. He lived in luxury built on crime. Then he betrayed Capone and paid with his life. Butch watched his father's choices and made different ones. Butch chose service. He chose the Navy. He chose to fight for his country. He earned the Medal of Honor. He became a hero. He died protecting others. In doing so, Butch O'Hare redeemed the O'Hare name. There is a strange symmetry to the O'Hare story. Easy Eddie betrayed Al Capone to help his son get into Annapolis. That betrayal cost Easy Eddie his life. Butch graduated from Annapolis, became a fighter pilot, and earned the Medal of Honor. That honor made Butch a target for dangerous missions. Butch volunteered for the experimental night fighter mission that killed him. Both father and son made choices that led to their deaths, but their motivations were different. Easy Eddie wanted to clear his name. Butch wanted to protect his shipmates. Easy Eddie died in shame. Butch died a hero. O'Hare never talked publicly about his father's connection to Al Capone. He avoided the subject in interviews. He focused on the Navy and on his pilots, but the connection was always there. Newspapers occasionally mentioned it. People whispered about it. O'Hare carried that burden quietly. He let his actions speak for him, and his actions were clear. Butch O'Hare was nothing like his father. Butch was brave, selfless, and honorable. He proved it on February 20th, 1942. He proved it again on November 26, 1943. O'Hare's story is taught at naval academies and flight schools. His tactics are studied. His accuracy is legendary. The 4 minutes over the Lexington are considered one of the greatest individual feats in naval aviation history. O'Hare saved a carrier, killed 5 bombers, and did it alone with only 60 rounds. That accomplishment has never been matched. O'Hare set a standard that still inspires pilots today. His name is on an airport. His name is on a ship. His story is in the history books, but the man behind the story is often forgotten. Butch O'Hare was not superhuman. He was scared during that fight. He knew the odds. He knew he might die, but he attacked anyway. He did not think about the consequences. He thought about the Lexington. He thought about the sailors on that ship. He thought about his duty. That is courage. Not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of fear. O'Hare acted. He saved lives. He earned the Medal of Honor. And he died trying to save more lives on a dark night over the Pacific. The ocean claimed O'Hare's body. His plane was never recovered. There is no grave, but his legacy remains. Every time someone flies through O'Hare Airport, they are reminded of the man who saved a carrier with 60 bullets. Every time a Navy pilot studies gunnery, they learn about O'Hare's accuracy. Every time a fighter pilot faces impossible odds, they remember the 4 minutes over the Lexington. Butch O'Hare did not live to see the end of the war, but he helped win it. One fight at a time, one bomber at a time, 60 rounds at a time.